Now, as I said before, you all know how we behaved when we found ourselves in Congo. We failed to control ourselves, and we started helping ourselves to other people's property. We ended up with a huge fine of $10 billion, which we have not paid. Okay? Now, if we were able to behave like that where we're not supposed to be, how could we possibly be behaving where we're actually in charge? Okay? If we couldn't resist the riches of the Eastern DRC, are we to believe that the same army is resisting the riches of Karamoja, which are more than those of DRC? How many investigations and so on and so forth are taking place about this issue? Because it's a very big issue. Why has Karamoja suddenly become the headquarters of development in this country? Why is it suddenly important to settle these people? Because of my age, I have been hearing stories about Karamoja from a very early age, how missionaries used to go there with vehicles with false bottoms and fill them with minerals and drive out and so on and so forth. These stories have always circulated about two places, Karamoja and Mubende. I don't know if my uncle can confirm this, if you've ever heard such stories. Okay? So to me, I would begin, these are things I would want to think about, but if we're all in a press conference waiting for the next wonderful utterance from the glorious leader or whichever minister has been sent, we might miss these. And some of these stories are very boring and time-consuming and money-consuming and painstaking. Okay? So, but because you have those pressures I mentioned earlier, you have your board, you have your MD, you have the MD's assistants, you have the head of marketing on this side, and actually you have even the legal advisor on the other, flanking the newsroom. Some of these stories never become stories, okay? Now, I think the challenge is to find a way of making these stories become these stories, because these to me are the stories about development, okay? Not so much who has cussed out who at a press conference. And that is my argument about on that particular point. So I'm about to finish, Mr. Chairman, or Chairperson, or Moderator. I think that one of the problems that we therefore have, as a third example, I had many, many examples, but I'll be happy to give them if we continue discussing, is the legitimization or the respectability of hate history in this country. For example, it's very common, and it happened a lot during, if you read the Daily Monitor's very interesting Uganda at 50 series, some very interesting things happened. If, for example, somebody was helping the colonialists conquer some community and establish a colonial outpost there, some African person, and that African person happened to come from Buganda, it was mentioned that this Muganda person or this Baganda went with so-and-so on that conquering mission, which is a fact. They went and they were Baganda and they did it. If, on the other hand, somebody was fighting against the conquering army, okay, Lugard's army and Colville's army, in the same period of time, and that person happened to come from Buganda, it was not necessarily mentioned at that point that that person was a Muganda. Sometimes they would simply stop at the person's name, or maybe call that person an African patriot, or a resistor, or a fighter, or something. Okay? This became interesting, because I actually tried to monitor it, and I had interesting discussions with one of the editors afterwards about it. You see, there are things that become stuck in our minds. Like, it is a standard, if anyone is writing an article about the land disputes between the kingdoms of Buganda and the kingdoms of Bunyoro, and the kingdom of Bunyoro, they will often say that, you see, this land was given to Buganda as a reward for Buganda helping the colonialists conquer Bunyoro. That's a standard statement. I think you've all seen this paragraph at some point if you read such stories. Have you? Okay. Now, I've asked a couple of questions around that. I've asked then, how would you describe the entire landmass that is the kingdom of Toro? Because what happened is that the person who was put on the throne in Toro, when Lugard was sitting up in what is now Uganda's State House, here in Nakasero, Emperor Kabalega interfered and said, no, you won't be the king, and he got someone else and put him there. So the one who lost out trekked to, not to Uganda, but to Lugard's fort and complained that, that they're rigging elections in Toro. Let me put it like that. And Lugard immediately assembled an army and went and fought because he saw an opportunity to start the war against Bunyoro and put this other guy back on the throne who wanted to be the king. That is actually why the capital of Toro is called Fort Portal, because they had to first build an English military fort from which to continue the expeditions northwards. Because in Kabalega's view, Toro was part of the Bunyoro Empire, and therefore he decided who was in charge of Toro. I have never seen an article in the same paper saying that Toro was given to Toro as a reward for their helping Lugard invade Bunyoro. I have never seen, because I can give you more land masses. All of what you call Ankole in the north used to be part of, actually, in that same period, the empire of Bunyoro. All of northwest Busoga was also part of the empire of Bunyoro. I don't know if you're aware of this. That is why up to today, if you're burying a prince in those parts of Bunyoro, you're supposed to bury him facing, in Busoga, sorry, facing Bunyoro. Okay? And they will tell you it's not a problem. They will say that we migrated here from Bunyoro and this was part of the empire. Parts of Lango, like especially Oyam, were also part of Bunyoro. Now Oyam is now part of Lango. North Busoga is part of Busoga. North Ankole is part of Ankole. I have never read an article saying that those places were given to those places as a reward. Leave that one alone. I've never had an article simply saying that those places used to also be part of Bunyoro, because it would then interrogate the logic of that paragraph. Okay? Now you can say what you want. You can say it doesn't matter. But it does matter, because people keep fighting over this thing. And if you want to solve this problem, you have to know the facts. And one of the places people go to facts is media houses. You have to understand that history is former news. Do you understand that? The events you read about in history books are former news items. Okay? The first draft, as it were, of history is what you read in a newspaper. So you have to be conscious of the responsibility that you're taking. So I think that we fall victim and allow ourselves to be misled. What are we going to do about it? My original proposals were very detailed and NGO-ish. Let me give you some very interesting other examples and then give you my conclusions. I'd like to show you, excuse me a minute, I can't find the top page. Yeah, I have some interesting articles here, which Open Society. There's this one here in the New Vision, that Uganda is to launch its first space observer. Did anybody read this article? Okay. I actually had to stop, I'm not lying, and go to the toilet. Okay. The vice president was being briefed by the executive director and founder of the African Space Research Program. Okay. He says this has demonstrated that Ugandans can also participate in sophisticated programs. This is impressive, and the government will support the association. I am going to brief the president about this, Sekandi said. Okay. Nsamba revealed that the space probe has a self-defense anti-time missile features, which protect it from being hit by missiles destined to destroy it in case it passes in the space of another country. Okay. The team also hid the space probe and demonstrated to the vice president how it can be tracked using satellite in case it lands in another country. After launch, they will put a mouse in it and it will be lifted to the stratosphere by a helium balloon. Take note, not before launch. After launch, they'll put the mouse in it. Okay? The space probe is fitted with cameras and a wide-angle fisheye lens to be used to taking pictures, etc., etc. We shall send a mouse into space. If it comes back alive, it will mean that Uganda is able to send human beings into space. Because as you all know, there's not a huge, big difference between a human being and a mouse. Okay? As the probe orbits the planet, it will pick dust molecules for our laboratory research. He said that the thing is called Kadimela. Will orbit the space twice, I'm quoting, and come back with samples. In case it lands on water, they can command it back to the surface. Take note, not in case it lands underwater, because if it lands on water, I think it's already on the surface. But anyway, wherever it has landed, it can be commanded back to the surface, etc., etc. Again, you people, you're very young. There was a thing called Sputnik, which was the first thing to carry a biological life form into space. I think it was either a dog or a monkey, done by the Soviet Union about 1963. Okay? Whenever these countries, Japan, China, the United States, or whatever, are sending stuff up into space, rockets, they actually ask around, does anyone want to send up, is there anything you want? Okay? If you pay us, we'll carry your equipment up for you. We can get soil samples or whatever they are called up there. We can take photographs or whatever. Of course, it's a question of how much they will share with you. But you don't need your own space chinankani to do it. Now this thing, there's something seriously suspect about this whole article. But it dragged in the vice president. Okay? The other big thing you may have seen was when it was announced that Makerere University has made a car. Do you remember this story? And no less than our head of state was taken and driven around in the thing. There were no traffic cops present, so the designers didn't have to part with any money. I did a bit of research. I have a friend who's an inventor. He invents all sorts of things, and he says that his life has been made miserable by the Uganda Industrial Research Institute or something. He says that they really, really mistreat inventors. There are quite a few inventors in Uganda and in Africa. But they're very frustrated people, almost as frustrated as heads of newsrooms. I'm very sorry to share this with you. But having talked to him, I then did a bit more research. And I finally came up with these internet links. I have a whole thing here. It's called Building Your Own Kit Car. Okay? There are places you can go in the world and you decide, oh, I want to have a car, but I want it to look like my own car, and I want to enjoy the experience of assembling a car. And they have designed various parts of a car. The frame, the chassis, and the axles, and mainly the body. Then they ask you, what kind of engine do you want? Do you want an engine from Mazda? Do you want this type of engine and that? And you choose from the list, and they send this stuff to you. And you assemble it. It's a very common thing. I've seen it in the UK. People who like to tinker with things, assembling these things in their backyards. You don't manufacture a single thing. You don't manufacture the wiring or the wheels or the things that create the suspension. You certainly don't assemble the engine. You don't design anything. You simply assemble parts sent to you. This thing has become so popular that even the global car manufacturing industry has taken us up aspects of it. So any of you can Google this. It is called a knockdown kit. In some parts of the world, because of the different tax regimes, rather than export a whole car, they will make the parts and send them to the other country to assemble them again. But this is now at a high level industrial process with quality control and the rest of it. But the rest of the time, you can order your car and you get, this is an example of one, okay? They'll usually send you a fiberglass body and then a few other things. And you spend 2-3 months using an instruction manual to put the thing together. So I became curious to understand, what did we mean when we said we made a car? okay? And it was the beginning of Uganda's car industry, okay? Because these are the things that came. This was a wonderful moment. And I still want to go to Makerere in a safe kind of way and actually ask these questions, okay? Because the article has things like what to expect in the box. That is the box that they send to you. Then it tells you the different types of models. You can even make a replica of a car that once existed, and so on and so forth. That's what they did. In my view, they did something that amateur engineers do in Western countries all the time. They did it on our campus and they were praised. And I'm beginning to worry at our level of interrogation as the media. This is an example of it. This is the assembly manual for one of those types of cars. Okay? I've had all this stuff printed out because I don't want you to think I'm making wild allegations against the technological prowess of our country. Okay? Table of contents. Parts to be purchased, tools to be rented, tools and parts, and so on and so forth. Then it simply takes you step by step how you assemble the vehicle. Step by step. I'm not saying it's an achievement, okay? It's an achievement. But it's not a car industry, okay? You didn't manufacture a car. You assembled parts in the correct order that the manufacturer drew for you, which is something in itself. But why are we talking about this in this different way? And when are we going to have the capacity to ask the difficult questions when they need to be asked? That's what, and I come back to my point. Are we misleading, or are we being misled? Or in the process of being misled, are we then also misleading others? So my conclusions had been very simple, but then I've added a few more difficult ones. And I think Mr. Mugisha is the one who raised the point. Very simply, he said, one, if the government wants to make laws regulating journalists, should journalists not also call for laws regulating media house ownership? Okay. For example, should there not be actual journalists who by law have to sit on a board of directors of a media house? Okay. Even to deal with simple things. Like a journalist said to me after the election violence in Kenya, that the problem here is that the equipment is insured, but we are not. Okay. And it's a very real thing. You see, that's why you see, when camera operators fall down, he's more concerned about the fate of the camera than his own fate. Should we have legal reforms to create secular not-for-profit organizations so that it doesn't have to be that in order to create a media house, it has to be a privately owned company whose mandate is to make a profit? Because it's logical for a director of a board to demand to see the balance sheet and the profits and loss account and want to know why you're not making money and which journalist is creating the problem. I think for journalists and editors, we need to improve our own code of conduct and actually accept what I'm calling a sanctity of facts doctrine. I think it is in law where they say to you, as a human being, you are entitled to your own opinions. Every human being is fully entitled to have their own opinions. But no human being is entitled to have their own facts. Okay? Facts must be seen as sacred. If you want to write something in a newspaper, either that Uganda manufactured a car, or that Uganda has joined the space race, or that only, as it were, Buganda was rewarded for the war against Bunyoro, or that in fact it was an award. Why don't we first decide whether these are facts or not? Okay? Because there's a writer called Philip Oruni who wrote a beautiful book and self-published it called What is Right for Uganda. The first line in his book is that Uganda is the only country he knows where racism is officially taught in schools. Because what we are taught in schools in this country is how to hate one another. We are told how bad we have been to one another and how we have to keep our guards up regarding the other side. Am I lying? Okay? And that's why I'm saying we must adopt a sanctity of facts doctrine. Just because something has appeared for 20 years in a newspaper doesn't mean that it is now correct. You have the time and the resources. Go on and ask yourself, is that actually a fact? And that is why it took us to the 10 Commandments. Many people here have been following the 10 Commandments and can recite them from memory, because you learn them maybe at 5 or 6 or 10 years old. But they don't know the difference between adultery and adultery. Okay? That is very worrying. It means that your way of seeing is being defined for you by somebody else. You have 2 eyes and a brain that can compute, but you haven't developed your own way of seeing. You are inheriting ways of seeing, but you don't know whether the motives of the one who designed that way of seeing and the interests of the one who designed that way of seeing are the same as yours. Okay? And this is a very critical problem. That's why I'm saying you therefore understand the bias between, the difference between bias and objectivity. A journalist is entitled to an opinion as long as they can defend it with historical arguments and facts. It doesn't mean you're not seeing the whole picture. It means you have an opinion on that picture. And as long as you're open about it, it's not a problem. With that in mind, we must finally, therefore, simply unpack what has become, I think, a very confused situation. Many people seem to be shocked by the recent closure of the Monitor newspaper. Didn't see anything new in that. Okay. And as the political crisis becomes more interesting, let me use that word, as more people perhaps change their names and change their addresses, you might find that more questions will be asked of journalists. How did you know that? Who told you that? Why are you reporting that? And so on and so forth. What are you going to do? Okay? The tragedy is to imagine that you are free when you are not free. Okay? The tragedy is to imagine that you have rights that other people understand and respect. Okay? If you've ever been imprisoned in this country and a policeman says to you that there is no law in this country, then you have to wonder, what are they teaching in various places, especially Chankwanzi. Okay? I think we need to revisit, finally, in conclusion, Mr. Chairman, the period 1986 to 1996, because that is when this whole architecture was put in place, including the capacity to confuse people to imagine that they're free when they are not, and to imagine that they're committing adultery when they are not. Okay? If you see what I mean. The whole meaning of privatization. Who demanded it? Who benefited from it? What was lost? The destruction of the rural agricultural economy and the cooperative movement. Who demanded it? Who benefited from it? What was lost? The war in northern Uganda. How did it start? How did it proceed? What ended it? Who were the actors? Who did what to whom? Okay? And in particular, the ban between 1986 and 1996 of political party activity. Who benefited from this? Why did political parties go along with it? This is a question I put on air to Dr. Semogedere, that if you are insisting now that it is a God-given right to form political parties, why did you violate God's rights and take part in the party ban in 1986? Okay. What happened after that? It was a very strange thing. So many of my interviews, when we end and we go off air, if the person is much older than me, they would have to tell me that, by the way, you don't seem to know, your father was a very good friend of mine. Okay. One actually said it even before, that, you know, I used to know your father. And it's actually a way of saying, stop being difficult. Okay. You're a young man, you don't understand these things, and I'm going to report you to your father. So, I would like to conclude on that point I have several copies of the Margarines article for those who might need it. It's a very important point in Ugandan journalism. Then the space probe. Who wants the space probe? You know, Kadimela, I believe is her name. I don't know. No, they've never reported to follow up to say that the mouse is now in space. But you must admit it's a better fate for a mouse than the other one. That you know the rat that was eaten to get a district. The gentleman called Leonard Okello who told me that actually the man who bit the rat contracted some kind of infection and died. Apparently, the one in the photo who was biting the rat. Because rats carry a lot of things. They carry something called Weil's disease in their urine, which if not treated will kill you. So apparently he died. Okay. So it's a loss, That rat could have gone into space and the man could have still been a productive citizen. And there you have it. I'm keeping the manual for building a car because I'm actually going to one day try it. And maybe I'll also have a VIP come and launch it. But I'm happy to share the other document about building your own kit car. I don't know who I'll give that to, whoever wants it. Plus another Margarines article. So there it is. That is the future of your country. You're going to space, and you have to stop eating margarine because you'll get brain damage. Actually, I think the thing that causes brain damage is trying to be a journalist in this country. But anyway, Mr. Chairman, I have to force myself to stop talking now. There's another one here, sorry. I want to give away all these documents. Excuse me. I hope I have made some sense. Please feel free to challenge me on any point that I've raised that doesn't make sense. And thank you very, very, very much indeed for coming all this way to listen to somebody like me. Thank you.